Terry and I got married in our early 20s. Our first child, James, was born when I was 24 and Terry was 23. Leslie was born just over 3 years after James, and we decided that 2 children was enough. Terry had a tubal ligation, and I had a vasectomy to make sure we wouldn't have any more children. Our marriage was good overall. The only downside was Terry's jealousy. When Terry was a freshman in college, she thought she had found the love of her life, and they planned to get married after graduation. During her sophomore year, she returned to their shared apartment because one of her classes was canceled and found him in bed with a girl she considered her best friend. Although I didn't know Terry at the time, I suspect this episode changed her completely, and not for the better. She was extremely suspicious of all my female friends, and God forbid that I kissed a woman on the cheek. I would definitely hear about it in full. However, since I had no plans to change Terry, I simply made allowances for this and suppressed my normal expressions of tactility and sensitivity. Anyway, when James was 15, Terry and I actually got along quite well and hadn't fought in years. In October, after James' 15th birthday, I received an invitation to a wedding from my cousin Dave. Dave and I saw each other a lot as children and teenagers, but we haven't dated since I married Terry. We talked once or twice a month, but we never managed to be in the same part of the country at the same time. I called Dave, congratulated him, and apologized for not being able to come. Between Terry, the children, and work, it was not possible. Dave understood, and we had a pleasant conversation. About 3 or 4 weeks before Dave's wedding, the company I worked for decided to begin negotiations to purchase the smaller company in Dallas where Dave lived. Out of the blue, my boss and I were told to prepare for an ID review the following week after Dave's wedding. I immediately called Dave and asked if the invitation to his wedding was still valid. Of course, yes, and appropriate agreements were made. I asked Terry if she wanted to come with me, but she refused, citing work and children. On Saturday morning, Terry drove me to the airport, kissed me goodbye, and I headed to Dallas. The company provided my boss and I with a very nice hotel in downtown Dallas, and I asked that my Saturday night stay at the same hotel. The company didn't mind as long as I paid for the Saturday night myself. I finally met Dave late Saturday afternoon and was blown away. Dave and I didn't look alike as children or teenagers, although we had the same hair color and our facial features clearly showed that we were related. Age has changed the situation. If you were standing in another room, I doubt you could tell us apart. Up close the differences were obvious, but from a distance you would have thought we were twins. I met his future bride and immediately thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Dave was the same age as me, and Elaine was 32. In fact, Elaine was not her real name, but Americans had a hard time pronouncing her real name, which was Elena. Elena was born in Russia and came to the United States when she was a small child. Her English was perfect, but with a slight Russian accent that was charming. We got along great, and I joked to Dave that if I had seen Elena first and wasn't married, he would have had to fight for her. Elena, or Lena as Dave called her, just laughed and said that I would have to do a lot more than just hanging the moon to beat Dave. I went to the wedding and the reception afterwards, then went back to the hotel to meet with my boss about the next week and what we needed to discuss. Everything was going great. Our audit showed that the company had even slightly underestimated its potential, and Eric, my boss, and I were confident that they were ideal for our purposes. I made evening calls to Terry and the kids as usual when I was away. Everything seemed normal until Wednesday evening. When I called, no one answered, so I left a message and asked Terry to call back if he had time. I didn't think much about it, since Terry often took the children to her parents or sister when I was away. There was no response again on Thursday. I left another message asking Terry to call back and reminding her of the time and my flight number. The first sign that something was seriously wrong was when I tried to check out of the hotel on Friday morning. We had a few hours of final meetings left, and then Eric and I were getting ready to board a plane and leave. Eric had to meet relatives in the East, and I was getting ready to go home. I tried to pay for my stay at the hotel with a credit card, but was informed that the card was declined. I tried another one, but without success. In the end, I had to ask Eric to help me out. Eric wasn't very happy, but he helped. We drove Eric's rental car to the airport after our meetings, and I tried to contact Terry both at home and at work. No one answered at home, and at work they said that she had taken a week off and did not expect to appear in the office for another week. Now I was really worried. I had no idea what was going on and couldn't contact Terry. I tried to call her cell phone and James's, but both phones were turned off. I left messages on both numbers and went to my flight. When we landed, I hurried to get off the plane. Of course, Terry couldn't meet me at the exit due to all the security measures, but I expected to see her in the waiting area right behind security. My heart sank when I didn't see Terry or the kids in the waiting area. Then I noticed him, a man in a nice suit, holding a sign with my name on it, like limousine drivers do. I walked up to him, told him I was Bob Simmons, and asked him what was going on. He looked at me and asked, "Robert Simmons?" "Yes, I have something for you." He took a stack of papers from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed them to me. "You have been served with a subpoena." With these words, he turned and left. I shouted after him, asking what was going on, but he simply ignored me and continued walking. I finally sat down on one of the chairs in the terminal and started looking at the papers they gave me. These were divorce papers, which was immediately obvious, but there were many other things there that were not at all clear to me. Apparently, I needed to take a taxi to get home, but I only had about $20–30 in my pocket, so I went to the nearest ATM to withdraw money. My card was declined. Oh God, what now? Finally, I called my sister Susan and explained my problem. She immediately agreed to come for me. I was waiting for her on the sidewalk when she arrived about 40 minutes later. I got into the car, throwing my suitcase and briefcase into the back seat, and buckled up. I explained again what happened. I couldn't seem to stop talking about it. Finally, Susan told me to calm down and that she would look at the papers when we got to her house. When we arrived, Susan poured me a very strong drink and began reading the divorce papers. Finally, Susan finished the paperwork and told me that Terry had filed for divorce. She wants child support, spousal support, and full legal and physical custody of James and Leslie. Although adultery was not grounds for divorce in our state, she argued that my adultery was grounds for granting her sole custody of the children. She also obtained a restraining order against me, claiming that if I received the documents, I might physically attack her or the children. Susan, this is crazy. I never laid a hand on Terry or the children, and I have no respect for those who beat their wives. It doesn't matter. You have a restraining order placed on you, prohibiting you from having contact with Terry or the children until the hearing on the 15th. You can't go within 100 yards of Terry's home or place of work. I was stunned. What made Terry do this? Bob, I have to ask. Have you ever cheated on Terry? No way. Terry would have exploded like a Roman candle, and besides, I love her and don't want to do anything that could harm our marriage. God knows, I've had enough chances with my frequent trips, but I never didn't do that. I ended up staying with Susan and her husband until I found my own place. Susan lent me money for the deposit and the first and last monthly payment, and she agreed to represent me in my divorce case. The next day, Susan took me to our bank and we checked my accounts. The credit cards were canceled and our accounts were closed. The safe deposit box was there, but all that was left inside was a copy of our marriage certificate with the words, "You bastard," written in red lipstick. All our certificates, savings, etc. disappeared. I literally didn't have a penny. On the way back, Susan decided to drive past the house. She didn't say anything, and I was just shocked. As Susan pulled up to the house, she suddenly said, "Isn't that your car?" I looked and, sure enough, it was my car, parked quite a distance from the house. Susan laughed. "I bet if we measured the distance, that car is parked exactly 100 yards from the edge of your house." Susan stopped, and we looked at the car. It was my car. The back seat and trunk were filled with my things. It was obvious that someone had simply dumped clothes and belongings into the car without any order. Where there was not enough space, things were simply shoved and crushed. We showed up to court for the hearing and Terry didn't even look at me, let alone talk to me. Her lawyer provided a copy of our tax return from last year, which he used to support her request for child support and spousal support. Unfortunately, I had a very successful year and received a significant bonus at the end of the year, which of course was included in our tax return. Susan was able to challenge this with copies of my pay stubs, but it made it clear how the whole process would go. Terry was granted temporary custody of the children, and I was ordered to pay child support, which severely impacted my finances. The judge refused to order Terry to pay me back some of the money she withdrew from our accounts, saying that was an issue that needed to be decided at the main trial. I was given visitation rights with my children, but only every 2 weeks. A month or so later, Susan called me. I finally figured out why Terry thinks you cheated on her. Come to the office, I'll show you. I arrived and Susan set up the computer with the DVD. When she started it up, the screen showed my cousin Dave and Lena sitting on the balcony of their hotel room eating breakfast. Lena was in a nightgown and robe, and Dave was in a robe. At the end of the clip, Dave came up and kissed Lena, then they got up and went into the room. As I learned later, one of Terry's friends from work was on vacation with her children and husband. She let her daughter use her digital camera to take pictures of the hotel. On Wednesday, when Terry stopped answering my calls, her friend showed her vacation photos, saying there was a really cute series of pictures of two people who seemed to be in love that her daughter had taken. Terry clearly didn't find it cute. Susan and I tried repeatedly to get an explanation from Terry. Neither Susan nor I could contact Terry directly, but Susan sent several letters to Terry's lawyer trying to explain the situation. He simply ignored them, saying that all this could be settled in court. Visits could be better. In fact, they could be much better. Over the next 5 months, I saw the children only 4 times. Terry always made excuses. It was my parents' anniversary. I promised my mom they would come over for the weekend, and so on. A couple of times I came for the children, but they were not there, and there was no indication where they had gone. In the end, Terry made a mistake. Susan told me that things weren't going well, especially after the family services report came out completely on Terry's side. They ignored my words and told me that I was denying my infidelity. Finally, Susan got a court order for me to pick up the kids a week before the trial, partly because I really didn't see them much, and partly because we were going to take them to a marriage counselor and psychologist to try to refute the family services report. I even managed to talk to James on his cell phone, telling him that I would pick them up the next evening, and he was happy that we would have time together. When I arrived to pick up the children, there was no one at home, only a note on the door that I would not poison the minds of children with the help of my hired executioner. I was sitting in Susan's kitchen, and she was telling me that in the long run, it might actually be a good thing because it was parental child abduction, and the courts don't like that very much. Then my phone rang, and it was James asking why I had changed my mind about picking them up. I explained that I had not changed my mind, and that I had no idea where they were. Apparently, Terry told the kids I'd changed my mind and took them to a small town on the coast, telling them she was going to make it up to them by spending a week relaxing and enjoying themselves. Susan picked up the phone and told James we'd be there as soon as we could. She then busied herself with her laptop, then drove to the judge on duty, returning a few hours later with an order granting me full custody of the children and an order for any law enforcement agency in the state to help us get the children back. To say that Terry was surprised and angry when 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at the motel where they were staying, handed her the order, and escorted the children to my car with their belongings was an understatement. The obscene screams she directed at me made it clear where her head was. Terry did a great job with the kids, at least from her point of view. She managed to almost completely convince the children that I was to blame for the divorce and that I really didn't want them around. Susan and I worked with them all week, showing them videos and explaining who these people were. I'm not sure they were completely convinced until Dave and Lena flew in to testify the day before the trial. We have also prepared writs and declarations and notes supporting writs. By Sunday evening, both children were more than a little angry at their mother, feeling that she had deceived them. The psychologist interviewed both children over 2 days, and her final report was very favorable to me. The trial began on Monday, and Terry and her lawyer presented their case and brought in a marriage counselor who testified that he had spoken to the children, and they had expressed a desire to live with their mother and were extremely upset by my betrayal. Before Susan could say anything, the judge interrupted, asking who told the children about their father's affair. The consultant said he assumed the mother did it because the children already knew about it when they were first interviewed. The judge clearly had some problems with this, but said nothing more. Susan simply asked the counselor if his opinion would change if there was no infidelity. He replied that he would certainly change. There were several other depositions, mostly regarding the valuation of our house, Terry's testimony about how much money she needed to support the children, and so on. The only thing Susan really disputed was whether Terry told the kids about my affair and how she withdrew all the money from our accounts and closed our credit cards while I was away. Then it was our turn. I took the witness stand and testified about how I had been denied visitation with my children and how I had never cheated on Terry during our entire marriage. The courtroom door opened and Dave and Lena walked in just as I was finishing. In short, Dave and Lena have both confirmed that they are the people in the video. Susan then made an offer of evidence that both James and Leslie would testify that they wanted to live with me because they believed that their mother had manipulated and lied to them. Susan explained that she wanted to do this to avoid the children having to testify. We took a break and Terry and her lawyer talked to the children who were waiting in the hallway. Terry then came to me and asked if we could drop the divorce suit and try to work things out. I looked at her for a minute, then just said no. Too much had been said and done, and I couldn't trust her anymore. The judge's decision was a surprise even to Susan. I was provided with children and a home. Terry was required to pay the same amount of child support that she was requesting from me. The judge ordered Terry to give me back half the money she took out of our accounts minus her share of the value of the house, which wasn't much since we had refinanced the house just a year before. And to top it all off, she ordered Terry to pay my attorney's fees, which essentially negated the decrease in the value of the house. The judge also indicated at the end that she believed Terry would have done more harm to the children than I would have if the cheating allegations were true. Terry left crying and I went to talk to the kids. 3 months later, everything was settled. I did everything possible so that Terry could see the children, and they began to forgive her and get used to the fact that there were 3 of us. James turned 16 and I bought him a car so he could pick Leslie up from school and run errands for us. On Friday, I received a call from James. Dad, Tana and her mom have a problem. Tiana was James' girlfriend, and they dated for about 2 months. What's happened? Their condo burned down, and they really have nowhere to stay. Can they stay with us for a while? I found out the details and finally told James to meet me at home so we could discuss the situation. I took Tiana's mother's mobile number and spoke to her, explaining that there was something that could be done, but we needed to discuss it. I've already met Tiana. It was one of my rules to date whoever James was dating. Tiana was a rather pretty young woman, Eurasian it seemed, but very confident. When I met her mother, Ginny, I realized where Tiana got her looks. Ginny was a few inches shorter than me, Eurasian like her daughter, but with smaller breasts than Tiana. It turns out that Ginny and Tiana lost everything in the fire. Ginny only had her car and laptop left, but other than that they only had clothes on them. I told Ginny that she and Tiana could use the apartment above the garage. It didn't have a kitchen, but had a bedroom and bathroom, which should be fine for them. The only problem was that they were never furnished and there were no beds. Ginny looked at me, thanked me, and said there was another problem. I was laid off from my job a week ago, and my unemployment benefits haven't arrived yet. I spent a significant portion of my savings on buying a condo. I don't think I can find an apartment without a job. I also can't ask you to house us until I find one. Work. I thought for a few minutes and then decided. You and Tiana will have to sleep in sleeping bags tonight. Tomorrow we'll go out and buy a couple of beds. You can stay with us until you get back on your feet. I'd rather you spend your money on clothes for you and Tiana. With the rest, we'll figure it out as we go. Within a couple of days, we had beds for Ginny and Tiana. Ginny planned to use her benefits and savings to buy clothes for them. We divided food costs 80% by 20%. Otherwise, we simply shared any expenses we had. On Monday, I came home to a completely clean house and dinner was already in the oven. I told Ginny it wasn't necessary, but she just laughed and said she was going to contribute even if I didn't want her to. The first time Terry came to pick up the kids and Ginny answered the door, Terry was furious. Apparently, the kids just didn't say anything about Ginny. When I walked in, Terry started yelling at me that she knew I was cheating, and now she had proof. I simply told Terry that my life was none of her business, and if she didn't like it then that was her problem. We are no longer married, and she has no power over me. 6 months later, Ginny and Tiana were still living with us. Ginny and I fell into a routine. On Saturdays, we went shopping. Ginny planned the menu for the week. When I came home in the evening, Ginny and I would have a drink while dinner was cooked and the kids did their homework. We just talked about our day, about plans for the coming days, about Ginny's job prospects, about anything that came to mind. I looked back later and saw that we had actually entered married couple mode by not sharing a bedroom. But it was comfortable and very pleasant. Ginny was a great cook, and I helped her. In fact, I think some of our most enjoyable moments during that time were spent in the kitchen making dinner, with the kids coming in and trying to steal snacks. Ginny waved the wooden spoon, threatening to hit them if they didn't stop, but everyone knew she was just playing around. It was really funny to watch. Tiana would come in and distract her mother, while James and Leslie would steal enough food for a quick snack for 3, although all 3 of them quickly realized when she was serious. Well, my 2 understood. Tiana, of course, already knew. She didn't wave the spoon, she used her mother voice, and all 3 of them simply obeyed. Susan and Ginny became very good friends. It was completely normal to come home and find Susan and Ginny sitting in the kitchen chatting. Although Susan and I had always been quite close, we became even closer during this time. Susan couldn't have children, so James and Leslie always got a lot of her attention, and now Tiana too. Ginny finally got a job 3 or 4 weeks ago and was trying to save up some savings. James and Tiana got jobs as junior counselors at a summer camp for a month, which didn't make much money, but allowed them to go to camp for free and gave them some pocket money. They were leaving the next day, Saturday, and we managed to agree that Leslie could come a day early with them and return a month later on the same day. We invited Susan and her husband Doug over for a barbecue that night, mainly to celebrate Ginny's 1-month work anniversary and to send the kids off to summer camp. Ginny asked Tiana and Leslie to help her in the kitchen, preparing salads and such. Doug played catch with James while I started the fire to cook the chicken and ribs. Susan walked over to the grill, looked at me for a few minutes, then said, "Do you like Ginny?" "Of course you like it. What's not to like about it?" "Not as a friend, but as a woman." I looked at Susan for a few minutes, trying to figure out where this was going, then I said, "I tried not to give Ginny any idea that being a bed partner was a requirement for living here." Susan rolled her eyes. "Men are so stupid sometimes. This woman did everything except take her clothes off and walk around your bedroom to show her interest in you." "What? When Ginny goes to work in the morning, does she wear a bra?" "I guess so, actually, I guess so." "Why? And when you come home in the evening, does she have a bra?" I thought about it. "No, I don't think there is." "And how many women come home and take off their bra?" Light began to break through into my consciousness. Not much." "Exactly, Sherlock. I'm about the same size as Ginny, and I certainly don't do it. And I don't think I know anyone who does, unless they have a specific goal, like attracting a man. I didn't know she was interested in me." Do you think if she wasn't interested, she would still be living here? She wasn't even looking for a place to move, and you know she said she wouldn't look until Tiana got back from camp. If there wasn't interest on her side, she would move as soon as she found a job. If you have even the slightest interest, you should start showing it. Otherwise, you'll miss out on a very good woman who would do anything for you and is probably already half in love with you. With that, Susan walked away, grumbling something about how men should be brought to water and then taught to drink. I had a lot of time to think while I was preparing the food, but the rest of the dinner went well. As Susan and Doug walked away, she leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Remember what I told you, stupid." The next morning, we all got up early so the kids could start getting ready. Ginny and I prepared breakfast, and all the while Tiana giggled and whispered something in her mother's ear. Ginny told her to stop, but didn't use her mother voice, and Tiana just carried on as if she hadn't heard. Breakfast over, we packed everything in James' car and sent them off with strong warnings to Leslie not to play the role of little sister, but to listen to James and Tiana when they tell her what to do. We finished washing the dishes, most of which went in the dishwasher, but the pots, pans, and knives were always washed by hand. I washed and Ginny dried. I finished the last pan, placed it on the drying board, and turned around. Ginny stood with her head on the side, just looking at me. My mind went back to Susan's words from last night, and without thinking, I stepped forward, leaned in, and kissed Ginny. Not like a lover, just a quick kiss on the lips. Ginny looked a little surprised, then said, "Let's try again." She came up to me, put her arm around my neck, and pulled my head up. Our lips met, hers were soft and warm. I don't know how it happened, but I hugged Ginny, her back to me, and her hands holding my hands on her. I kissed her neck a few times, and she loosened her grip on my arms and moved my hands to her breasts. I kissed her neck to the point where her blouse prevented me from continuing, then whispered, "Your place or mine? Yours is bigger." Ginny took my hand and led me down the hallway, unbuttoning her blouse along the way. It didn't take long for Ginny to undress. We kissed as our hands explored each other's bodies. We had great sex finally. I rolled over and rested my head on her shoulder, occasionally kissing her breasts. We just lay there, enjoying the afterglow, for quite a long time, until finally Ginny said that she needed to get up and go to the bathroom. When she returned, she sat cross-legged on the bed. We talked, mostly about sex for some reason. We didn't go shopping until late that evening, and as soon as we got home, Ginny took off her clothes and announced that these were all she was going to wear for the rest of the weekend. She was right. The only thing we both wore for the rest of the weekend were aprons when cooking. We spent the entire weekend exploring our sexual preferences. Ginny wasn't the least bit embarrassed about her body or sex. She simply considered it part of her feminine essence and enjoyed it. She showed me a side of herself that I never knew about. She wrote erotic literature. She went to a website where she published some of her stories and showed them to me. It was new, but it didn't show me anything that I didn't already know about her. By Monday, I was really ready to go back to work because I didn't think I could handle another round of sex. I hadn't had that much sex since Terry and I were on our honeymoon, and I felt like it might just fall off from overuse. The next couple of weeks were great. We came home. Ginny always got home 20 minutes before me, and we'd have drinks in the living room, have a few drinks and talk, make dinner, clean up, and go to bed for another round. I suggested that Ginny move into my bedroom, but although she didn't say anything, she just wouldn't do it. She spent every night there, but returned to her room in the morning to get dressed and get ready for the day. As the end of the month approached and the time for the children to return, for some reason I became a little depressed. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I even talked to Susan about it once. She just looked at me and told me to think, rolling her eyes. It was just a few days before the kids were coming back, and I was really feeling overwhelmed. At home, I was always upbeat with Ginny, but it was difficult to maintain that attitude throughout the day. I had just gotten into the car and started driving when it dawned on me. I was depressed that Ginny was going to move. She said she would start looking for a place to stay when Tiana returned, and I knew that was the last thing I wanted. I got off the highway and drove to a flower shop. I knew and got there just before closing. I bought 2 dozen long stem roses, which cost me more money than I'd like to admit. When I arrived home, a little later than usual, Ginny was sitting in the living room reading. I brought a box of roses and handed it to her, getting down on one knee. Beauty for perfection. What's gotten into you? Oh God, they're beautiful. Ginny had tears in her eyes. Then she stood up and went to put them in a vase on the dining room table. I followed her, sitting at the table while she arranged them to her liking. When she finished, she came over to me, leaned over, and kissed me. Thank you for the beautiful flowers. They are so beautiful. Ginny, I need to talk to you for a few minutes. Ginny looked serious and sat down on the chair opposite me. I hesitated and hesitated for several minutes, then finally gathered my courage and said, Ginny, I love you, can't imagine life without you. I don't have a ring right now, but I would love you to marry me. Ginny froze. The only sign that she heard me was the tears that appeared in her eyes. This continued for what seemed like an eternity. Then Ginny stood up and came over to me, sitting on my lap. I will gladly marry you, you stupid man. But you need to understand that I will not be able to give you children. When Tiana was born, there were problems that made me no longer able to have children. I think 3 children is enough for anyone. We spent the rest of the evening talking. I learned that my fears about Tiana accepting me were unfounded. What Tiana teased her mother about the day the kids left was that now Ginny might have me in her bed. I didn't think James and Leslie would have a problem with Ginny since she had been playing the mom role for a long time, and they seemed to love her and their relationship. The next day I came home a little later than usual due to a meeting that had gone on for a long time. When I arrived, Ginny was moving the last of her things into the closet in my bedroom. She explained that she had no intention of living in sin with me while her daughter was still living at home, but since we were getting married, she saw no reason not to start living together as husband and wife a little sooner. I liked it. James called early Saturday morning. When we told him that we had a surprise for everyone when they returned home, we were bombarded with questions, but we refused to answer. The children returned home around 4 in the evening and burst into the house, wanting to know what the surprise was. Tiana stayed back, whispering something in her mother's ear, just like before. I noticed Ginny blush a little, and this time she used her mother voice to calm Tiana down. All the kids were happy, or at least said they were happy, that we were going to get married. Leslie liked the idea of her older sister, and James was thrilled that Tiana would be living with him at home, even though Ginny and I had a serious conversation about not having sex while they were living with us. The magistrate signed us off in 2 or 3 weeks. The only fly in the ointment was a call from Terry a week before the wedding asking if I was really going to marry this easy girl. I told her that I was not marrying someone who was easy to get, but rather a loving and caring woman who I wanted to spend my life with, a woman who would at least talk to me about her worries and not judge me. Then I hung up. When James and Tiana finally got ready to go to college, they decided to attend the same school. After many conversations with them, we finally agreed that they could rent a 2-room apartment, since it was much cheaper than living in a hostel or renting 2 apartments. The kids gathered a few of their friends to help them move everything they needed, and then invited us over the following weekend so we could see their new home. I guess we really shouldn't have bothered with a 2-bedroom apartment. When we arrived, the 2 single beds we sent them were moved into 1 bedroom to make a double bed, and the 2nd bedroom was turned into an office. The children showed it to us almost defiantly, and I started to say something, but Ginny put her hand on my arm. If you are sure that this is what you want, then fine. But be sure that this is what you really want. You are giving up a lot by not being able to meet and explore the world around you. I hope we will support you in this if you really want it. But make sure it's because you really love each other and not just want to have sex. 4 years later, we hosted James and Tiana's wedding, and less than a year after that, Tiana announced they were expecting a baby. We can't wait to see if it's a boy or a girl. Terry still thinks I cheated on her, but James just ignores her. Leslie tries to have as little contact with her mother as possible, but since she is under 18, we require her to follow visitation rules with her mother. I have never been as happy in my life as I was with Ginny. As I told her more than once, I wish we had met when we were 20. She just laughs at me and says that we would not have the grandson we have now if we had met then. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click